Hi, I'm Lynette and welcome to my channel. Can we talk? Dupes. Are all dupes created equal? Are all dupes treated equally? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about dupes, baby. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about dupes. Let's talk about dupes. So today's video is another installment in the Can We Talk series. And the topic today is dupes. Particularly eyeshadow palette dupes, because I've noticed here in the YouTube beauty community there seems to be a division, a great divide amongst people. There seems to be two camps. One camp that says eyeshadow palette dupes are wrong and people do not support them, and then the other camp that says I'm all about eyeshadow palette dupes, give them to me. So for those people that do not support eyeshadow palette dupes, it's because, you know, they're seeing another brand, let's say Bad Habit, for example, ripping off Anastasia Beverly Hills or Kat Von D. They're ripping off the packaging, they're ripping off the concept, they're ripping off the color stories, and people, you know, don't think that's right. And rightfully so. That people worked hard and put a lot of hard work and money and thought into making original products, and then somebody like Bad Habit comes along and just copies the whole idea and then sells it for cheaper, much cheaper. And then there's also the belief that these eyeshadow dupe palettes are taking money away from the original high-end brand palettes. So for example, if you buy one of the Natasha Denona dupe palettes, Bad Habit dupe palettes, that people are not then going to buy the Natasha Denona actual like Sunset palette, for example, and they don't think that's fair either. Then on the other camp, on the other side of this, you have the people that say, hey, I don't have the money, or I don't want to spend that much money for a Natasha Denona palette, $129 for a Natasha Denona palette, or I don't want to spend $125 for a Pat McGrath palette. And yes, but I love the color story of those eyeshadow palettes. So it's great that there are these dupe palettes for me to choose from that I can get the similar, if not same color story for a much more affordable price. Now, the idea of dupes are not new, not to the beauty community, and certainly not to, I don't think, any other industry, fashion, electronics. I think for as long as they've been making products, other people have been knocking them off. And that's what they are, right? Knockoffs. There's knockoffs of shoes, of pocketbooks, sunglasses. So the idea of dupes is nothing new to, I don't think, any of the industries, and certainly not the beauty industry either. Now, there do seem to be, though, even with eyeshadow palette dupes, there are brands like, I've seen YouTubers have made videos or have said in videos, and I've seen people who have commented on their videos who feel the same way, that they will not support Shop Hush, rest in peace Shop Hush, who doesn't make palettes, they just sold the dupe palettes. They wouldn't support Shop Hush, they do not support Bad Habit or any other brands that would make these eyeshadow dupes. They are against that whole concept and that whole practice, and will not support those brands. But then there are dupes that appear to be acceptable even within the eyeshadow palettes. Por ejemplo, Wet n Wild has some eyeshadow palettes. They redid these palettes. I don't know what these were the Color Icon palettes. So they kind of redid these palettes and redid these actual palettes and then came out with other palettes. And they have one in particular, I think they have a couple actually of the new versions of those that some people have noticed to be dupes of Anastasia Beverly Hills. The Modern Renaissance palette is one of them. And these dupes, though, have not garnered the same kind of critical and negative fervor as the Bad Habit dupe palettes. And I'm wondering why that is. Is it because they aren't obviously and directly copying a palette or a concept, as is Bad Habit? So the packaging, for example, this is a Bad Habit dupe palette. This is the Retro Love palette, and it's a dupe for the Anastasia Beverly Hills Subculture palette. And the packaging, in my opinion, I mean, the only thing similar, in my opinion, about the packaging is the shape. They're both oblong, rectangular shaped. But then the copying, the clear, obvious copying comes when you open the palettes and you see the color stories. So this being the Bad Habit palette, this being the ABH palette, as you can see, virtually, I mean, from just looking at them, the eyeshadow colors appear to be the same. The only difference is the layouts are different. The shadows are in a different layout or different order in the Bad Habit palette than the ABH palette. But just on eye inspection, the same palettes. Whereas with the Wet n Wild palettes, the packaging is not similar to the ABH, for example, Modern Renaissance palette. They're not the same shades, number of shades in the palette, but the shades are very similar enough to where some people have noted in videos and have considered them to be a dupe of the ABH Modern Renaissance palette. Same thing with the ColourPop Yes Please palette. Some people mentioned that it is kind of a dupe for the, I believe it's the Natasha Denona Sunset palette. So again, packaging very different, and the layout of the shadows very different, but the tone and the shades of the shadows similar, very similar enough to where people were pointing this out as, well, if you don't want to pick up or can afford to pick up the Natasha Denona Sunset palette, you should pick up the ColourPop Yes Please palette. But these palettes are considered acceptable dupes as opposed to the Bad Habit palettes, which are not. Now, my question in the beginning about are all dupes created equally or received equally or criticized equally comes outside of eyeshadow palettes, okay? So we're going to step outside of eyeshadow palettes and we're going to go into other areas of makeup. Por ejemplo, concealers. Tarte Shape Tape Concealer came out, blew a lot of people's minds. A lot of people, particularly here on YouTube as well, consider it a holy grail concealer. Use it every day, think it's fantastic. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And then Makeup Revolution recently came, not that recently, but recently in the last year or so, came out with their concealer, the Conceal and Define Concealer. And it looks quite similar, doesn't it? The packaging, very similar, if not the same, as the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer. And then the doe foot, big old doe foot, just like the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer. And I don't recall seeing one video. Doesn't mean that they're not here. I just don't recall seeing any. I don't recall seeing one video in which people were upset and critical of the Revolution concealer. Quite the contrary. I saw people making videos and talking about how excited they were about this dupe of the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer. Before anyone ever opened it, before anyone used it, applied it, tried it, it was already dubbed a dupe for the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer. And people were super excited. I don't remember seeing any video or reading any comment where someone said, they ripped off Tarte Shape Tape. How dare they? I don't support that. I won't support this concealer. Not one. So, it begs to wonder, and it begs the question, why is this obvious, to me, it's an obvious rip-off, knockoff of the Tarte Shape Tape packaging. This one is acceptable, but as an eyeshadow palette, this is an acceptable dupe, but this is not. And I don't bring this topic up to shade anyone or to talk shit about anybody's opinion about not liking dupe palettes. I'm really just curious as to why this is okay, but this is not okay. And whereas this is, in terms of packaging, you know, not that similar, this same packaging, people were not only excited that this could be a dupe, and it is a dupe in terms of packaging, but in terms of formula, people were hoping that it performed just as well, if not better, than the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer, because the Tarte Shape Tape Concealer, I think, is like, what, $39, $27, $29, something like that, wherein the Makeup Revolution Concealer is only $7. So I don't understand. This is what I want to talk about. This is what I want you to tell me. I want to know your thoughts about this confusing topic. Why are some dupes acceptable and some not? Just not acceptable. If this were an eyeshadow palette, I would imagine some people would be upset about this. Now, in terms of how I feel about them, if you've been here before and if you've watched this video, you see I have purchased eyeshadow dupe palettes. I totally understand what people are saying, where people are coming from, that, you know, don't appreciate Bad Habit totally ripping off ABH's concept. I totally get it. I totally get it. But for me, you know, I buy eyeshadow palette dupes when I either don't want to spend the money that a high-end brand is charging for a palette, or because I don't support a brand, but I really love the color story of the palette and I want it. So that's when I buy eyeshadow palette dupes. And in terms of taking business dupe palettes, taking business away from the high-end palettes, I don't agree with that, because, you know, I'm not going to buy a Pat McGrath dupe palette. I'm just not. I'm just going to buy Pat McGrath. I'm going to spend the money and I'm going to buy the Pat McGrath palette. I'm not going to buy the Bad Habit dupe palette. And so I don't think other people who are willing to pay the high-end price for the high-end products, Natasha Denona, Pat McGrath, any other high-end brand, ABH, that comes out with a palette, that are not going to not buy those palettes because, oh no, they're going to buy a dupe palette instead. So I don't think the brands are going to be, these dupe palettes are siphoning any money away from the high-end original palettes. So, you know, that's how I feel about dupes. I'm okay with them, but, you know, I want to know what you think. Should all knockoffs be treated equally or not? Or are there differences when it comes to dupes? Let me know. Sound off in the comments below. If you liked this video, found it at all interesting, then please give it a like and consider subscribing, because I do this series along with makeup hauls, tutorials, and swatches and reviews here on my channel every Saturday. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope to see you again next week. Until then, bye-bye.